Okay, so I'm a little late to the party. 26 years late, to be exact. Yeah, if this feels like it came out of nowhere, that's because it did. Considering that I'm doing a game review on a 26-year-old game, I can't imagine this video is going to do very well. But after playing it, I felt passionate enough and basically obligated to make a review of this game and talking about just how good it is. Because here's the thing, I am pretty well known by my friends and people I talk to about games as basically resident old game hater. I'm not talking old games as in like 2015 to 2020 or anything like that. I'm talking classic old games. You know, the games that are just, well, dated. I have some pretty hot takes in the field. The most notable ones are probably Star Wars Battlefront 2 2005, as well as The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I think both of these games just simply do not hold up to today's standards and are almost not worth playing whatsoever today. There's no denying that Zelda Ocarina of Time especially is a hallmark in gaming. It gets 10 out of 10s across the board, and the thing is that I don't even argue that. Zelda Ocarina of Time deserves 10 out of 10s because for its time, this game was phenomenal. It was perfect. It was a perfect game. It did things that no other game had done before and laid the groundwork for just so many games to come. But that's just it. It laid the groundwork. It got some things right, but at the end of the day, those things, that groundwork has been improved upon time and time and time and time again. And so if you take someone and you're like, here, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild exists, and then you look at Ocarina of Time, you're like, well, why would I even bother playing that? And the same sort of thing goes with Star Wars Battlefront 2 to a less extent. The game is plagued with a bunch of technical problems and issues that just make it kinda jank when compared to today's standards. And it's not fair to compare these games to today's standards, but people do it anyway, and they say that they're 10 out of 10 still, and they still hold up, and they're still the best games ever. And I just don't agree. But that's why it was so important to me to make this video, because after playing Final Fantasy VII, somehow, for the most part, this 26-year-old game, at least to me, holds up. What? How? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, because I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Final Fantasy VII from start to finish. And the only thing I regret about the game is not recording the entire thing, because when I went to play it initially, I just expected to just play it and not talk about it at all. With all that context out of the way, we're going to start with the most important thing to this game, and that's going to be the story. Naturally, spoiler warning ahead. I can't not say that, but the game is 26 years old anyway, so if you haven't been spoiled on what happens in this game by now, I'd be pretty surprised. But there are some small things in there that I think that are important, that are also not super public, I guess. I don't know, at least I didn't know them when I was playing through the game, so things were still a surprise to me, which really helped. Anyways, here's the timestamp if you want to avoid the spoilers. The story for this game is the backbone of it, hands down. It's simultaneously so down to earth and yet so batshit crazy at the same time. I don't know how they pulled it off. I really genuinely don't. It feels like a disaster all the way through. There's just like 800 plot threads running at once. You have Sephiroth and Jenova and the Cetra / Ancients, and then Mako Energy, and it's trying to tell this environmental message, but then it also talks about like illusions and giving yourself illusions and mental health, and it's just like, I don't know if some of this stuff is intentional, and it's hard to put it all into words, but oh my god. And then all of a sudden, there are giant, like, robot monsters walking around, destroying cities? What happened here? And yet I was engaged all the way through, the entire time I was playing. Not one point was I not looking forward to the next story beat or entirely engaged. I think the most surprising thing about the story for this game is just how mature and seriously it takes itself. When I initially got in, my general impression of Final Fantasy, as mostly a Final Fantasy noob, I won't lie, was sort of, crazy, batshit insane stuff, as well as some stupid comic fun time. And oh boy, oh god, I could not have been more wrong. This is a T for teen game, and people get murdered constantly, over and over and over again, right in front of your face. I think the most messed up thing to happen in the entire game, where my jaw literally dropped and I couldn't believe it, was the story between Barrett and Dine. The Cliff Notes version is basically Barrett and Dine were from the same village. There was some sort of accident. The big evil bad corporation blamed the villagers and for some reason decided to burn the whole village to the ground. Barrett and Dine weren't at the village, so they came back to help, and they both got their arms shot off. Because contrived fantasy reasons, they also both had guns grafted onto their missing arms, which is kinda hilarious. But what it ends up coming down to is both of these characters pick radically different paths. Barrett blames himself for going along with building the reactor that ended up having a problem and then caused the whole village to be burned down, and so what he decides to do is to try to make things better and make up for his failures. Dine, on the other hand, is so unbelievably depressed that he gets pushed off the deep end, believing that both his daughter and his wife are dead, so life isn't worth living, so he's basically just going to be an awful person. Now, what Dine doesn't know is that his daughter didn't actually die. His wife did, but his daughter is perfectly fine and in Midgar. When the party and Barrett finally find Dine, and Barrett's able to tell Dine, hey, your daughter's still alive, he's so far gone and has done so many horrible things since, everything that happened, that rather than live with his failure, he tries to kill Barrett, and then when he can't kill Barrett, he kills himself. Wow. The last thing I expected from this is somebody committing suicide because they couldn't live with what they've done. Just wow. Cloud's mental struggle, as well as his progression from basically sort of being a bystander and a nobody to savior of the planet and a real leader, was just, it worked so well. The entire plot thread when it came to the ancients and the giant robots and all that kind of stuff, it all just works. But I'm not going to get too far into it because I really don't want to just directly spoil everything in case people did watch through here anyway, despite the spoiler warning, and are now interested and maybe want to play the game. Anyways, that's a wrap on here, so let's jump over to the gameplay. Gameplay is where the failings usually start for these old games. And this is not that. The thing is that Final Fantasy VII's gameplay is extremely simplistic. Turn-based strategy games are not particularly difficult to make. And because they're not particularly difficult to make or program, they hold up against the test of time even to today. The thing I didn't really expect when it came to the gameplay for Final Fantasy VII, though, was how engaging it would actually be. My general impression of turn-based combat is one of two things. Either you play and you hit a wall and something's just flat out impossible and, you have to go grind some more and that's it. Or you absolutely crush everything and nothing's even remotely close. And so that's where something that almost got its own section but didn't quite comes in, and that's the grind and the difficulty in this game, which shockingly to me was in a really good place. I think throughout my entire 36-hour playthrough, which I haven't touched on yet. By the way, this game is 36 hours or so long to get through the whole thing, which is so much value, especially considering you can get it for like $12 on Steam, but I'm getting off track. Basically, the point is that I want to say for my 36-hour playthrough, total grinding time was probably around an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and that's the last thing I expected. I don't know if I just lucked out and happened to get lucky on bosses, or if I lucked out and am surprisingly good at a genre of game that I hadn't really played before, but generally speaking, I never hit any walls. There was one point where I thought I might start hitting walls soon, so I decided to grind a bunch, and I grinded for maybe 30 minutes, I want to say. And while I was doing that, I was leveling up and getting items, which I'll talk about in a second. But even after that and reaching the end of the game, I don't necessarily know if I needed to do that grinding at all. I think the way they managed to avoid a ridiculous amount of grind was by keeping you consistently engaged in gameplay by artificially making lengths of space that you need to cover longer. Because how engagements work in this game is while you're walking through an area with enemies, you can randomly get engaged. That's just how it works. You're walking and bam, you get pulled into the engagement screen and you have to fight. Now, in order to make it so you fight the correct amount of enemies to get enough XP to actually stand a chance in the upcoming battles, they make these areas that you need to cross where you can get engaged significantly longer than they otherwise probably should be. So sometimes it'll feel like you're walking across one screen for a really long time, which can probably be a negative for some, but I think it worked out really well here. It means you're constantly getting attacked, which means you're constantly fighting, and as long as you're fighting and winning battles, you're leveling up. Now, the other thing about grinding was that when I was actually grinding itself, I was still engaged. One of the things that I really cannot stand with modern turn-based games and just turned me off to the whole genre is the idea of auto battle. Auto battle is stupid, and don't at me on that. If you're having the game literally play for you, then why does that section of the game even need to exist? It's artificial grind, it's pointless, it's not fun, and it just turns me off from the whole genre every time I see it. It feels like on-purpose game padding, and I'm not a fan. And so that's why the grind here was so interesting to me, because you can kind of go on autopilot instead of an auto battle, pick the same moves over and over again, kill the same enemies, you get the idea. But if you want to be a little bit more engaged in the process, you can use other things like steal in order to steal items from the enemies that you're fighting, which will then be able to help you later, further emphasizing preparing for your next battle. You can also use the morph materia, which does significantly less damage, but if you kill certain enemies with the move, then it will transform them into really important items. One of the areas I was grinding had these sort of roly-poly guys, and if you used morph on them and managed to kill them, it would give you an item that permanently raised your vitality stat, which is effectively your damage resistance. So when it comes to efficiency, you could go through and just grind levels, but if you pay attention, manage the enemy's health properly, and finish them with certain moves while stealing their items, you end up getting more out of your time while also continuing to be engaged. After playing through things like this, it just boggles my mind that so many turn-based games decide to just have auto battle where you can just click a button and walk away. I just don't get it. It's so much better this way. And it was better this year, 26 years ago. Like, what happened to modern gaming? It's so sad sometimes, truly. In terms of difficulty, that's another serious high point, because remember how I said earlier I feel like turn-based games are usually just you stomping or you get stomped? Well, however they managed to put this game together to make it so enemies have these perfectly spaced out attacks that make you seriously feel the pressure while also not totally wiping your party was perfect. There were so many boss battles in this game where I was on the edge of my seat. I can't remember the last time I was so sweaty and worried about going back to a previous save because 2 of my characters were down and my last one had like 100 hit points left. And then just how good it felt to manage to clutch it out and take out the boss with barely any surviving party members. Now granted, some of that stuff is partly enhanced by the archaic and frankly probably just bad saving system, one of those things that is unfortunately better in today's games. Basically, there is no autosave in the game, so if you forget to save, you could lose hours of progress if you game over, or if you don't save at a certain point when you don't know if you have to, and then you enter another room and it triggers a boss battle. Yeah, that's stressful. Some of that stress made the game better, in my opinion, but at the end of the day, I can't choose whether or not that difficulty is artificial difficulty or if it worked well in the game's favor. But we've been here for an age and a half, so we're gonna move on to the sound design and the music. If I had to rate this game on music alone, it would be a 10 out of 10. No goddamn question. I knew that Final Fantasy VII's music was good. In fact, I've used it in a lot of my videos, so I'm sure some of you have heard it. But oh my god, the use of music in this game is masterful. And the tracks in here are all good. Nobuo Uematsu, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, doesn't miss at all through the entire soundtrack. Literally none of the tracks in here are bad or grating or get old. None of them. They all land and they're all just perfect. Like, I don't know what else to say. You've got stuff like the incredibly iconic battle theme that you hear hundreds upon thousands of times and still doesn't get old. You've got stuff like the boss battle theme that hits every single time it comes on. The Genova battles, like, wow. Two of my favorite tracks in the game are probably the airship theme and of course this Chocobo remix thingamabob from the Chocobo shop and some other places. And I mean, that's just a few. We're still missing things like One-Winged Angel, Genova Absolute, all of the town themes, the Cosmo Canyon theme goes hard. Like, all of them are good. The Condor Mountain or Condor Fort, whatever, like I go on and on and on and on because it's literally everything in here. And that's all about music, but the actual sound design itself in this game is equally as good. I can't even imagine the monumental challenge it must have been for the game designers of this game with the limitations of its time. And yet the sound effects for everything are so good. Hitting people feels so impactful. Getting critical hits is like, I found myself audibly going, ooh, when I landed a critical because of the sound effect. It's like, it's so hard to put some of this stuff into words. But overall, like, I can't understate how good the sound design for this game is. It's impossible. But, you know, that's kind of it for sound design and music. It's phenomenal, and I can't say much else about it. I was arguing with myself for a really long time if I was gonna give this game a score. Because let's be real here, I'm doing a very legitimate review of the game. This isn't one of those bad Roblox games where I just go in and I say, this sucks and you know it's bad. It's a real review, I plotted everything out, but I just don't know if it's fair to score it because of how many factors there are. It's really hard to score things based against today's standards versus games of the genre, and it's doubly not as fair because I'm just not a turn-based strategy game player, nor really a Final Fantasy player. So I don't know how the medium has evolved from here to then. So is it really fair for me to say that this is really good if things have improved tenfold? Because then I'm no better than the people saying Ocarina of Time is a masterpiece. But you know what? Screw it. I don't care. I'm gonna give it a score anyway. And in case it wasn't abundantly clear, this game gets a 10 out of 10. Yes, a 10. It's perfect. I like the limitations of its time, all right? Let's be fair. It should probably be a 9, but I enjoyed it so much, there's no way it couldn't be a 10, even with all of its massive problems. 10 out of 10 doesn't mean perfect, even if we're saying it's a perfect score, right? There are some major issues with the game. I already touched on some of them. The saving issue, oh my god, don't even get me started. I was absolutely crushed when I went through and lost like an hour and a half of gameplay. That was brutal. At the very end of the game, I thought it was a kind of interesting tidbit that they don't give you a static save point, but they give you an item to put a save point down. But at the end of the day, I feel like this was sort of a negative decision because I ended up putting my save point pretty far back. And so when I beat the game, it sent me back to this save, and I had done a whole bunch of stuff afterwards. So it's been kind of hard to get myself to play some of that other endgame stuff and level up when I know that I have to go through almost the entire dungeon again to get all those items that I didn't really miss, but I did technically miss them because I saved so much further up. And it's not just the saving points. When it comes to combat, sometimes things can be really slow, and there are several moments in the game where it feels like things just sort of awkwardly stop as an animation starts or stops. I don't know. It's weird and hard to explain. Of course, the infamous and most notable one is 100% Sephiroth Supernova, which I guess is sort of a spoiler. I said I wasn't going to do any more spoilers, but like, just watch this. This whole time, you're inactionable. Just watch. No. Fuck off. Stop using Supernova. You son of a bitch. This takes forever. I could go to the bathroom and come back and you'd still be doing this. Yeah, is it cool? Sure. The fact that you have to watch it like 2 or 3 times during the fight, yeah, maybe a bit overkill. And that sort of sentiment goes for a lot of the summons in the game, where sometimes I just couldn't rationalize using these cool summons because they took so long and didn't do enough damage to compensate later on in the game, so I just barely used summons towards the end because I guess the ones I had weren't that good. And of course there are other problems. I'm not gonna get into all of it because I don't think it really matters. At the end of the day, you can get this game on Steam for like $12. You could emulate it probably pretty easily for free. And for those $12, this game is an absolute steal. 100% worth your money 26 years after the fact. I started playing Final Fantasy VII again after a huge multi-year hiatus where I initially planned on playing the game before the remake came out so that way I could play the remake and see how it compared to the original game. That went on hold when I found out that the remake was only going to be on PlayStation, and then by the time the remake actually did come out on PC, I just sort of lost interest. That interest got reignited, and I was like, well, I might as well finish this game, and I was not expecting to enjoy it or have it suck up as much of my life as it did. Overall, Final Fantasy VII has no right being as good as it is for as old as it is. And because I know a lot of you are young, you probably won't bother going to play this because the remake's out, which I still haven't played and I'm really looking forward to. And of course, naturally, this is a channel based around Roblox, so barely anybody's gonna watch this anyway. But if somehow I manage to sway one person into playing this game that otherwise wouldn't, and considering it can run on a toaster, like, you don't even have an excuse. You could run this on anything. Like, I don't know. That would be a win in my book. Just one. That's all I need, and this whole video is worthwhile. Anyways, that's all from me. I hope you found this review insightful. Of course, if you did, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, you could tell me I'm an idiot or talk about how much you hate me because I said Ocarina of Time wasn't as good as you think it is. I'd leave some mean comments, don't like, don't subscribe, you know, all that cool stuff. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.